Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. We have got our preview episode of the week. We've got Cat Paws, Aaron Gershon on to talk Georgia and Kentucky. Georgia's SEC opener is going to be Saturday night, 7:30 Eastern on ABC. So we got one of our favorite experts. I always love having Aaron on to talk a little Wildcat football. And before we get this thing started, Aaron, how's everything going? We're kind of getting into the thick of the football season, and I know you've been as busy as any of us.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you having me. It's always fun to do this podcast every year. It's going pretty well. Look, the football team is coming off one that no one expected. I think everyone expected to win that game, but if they were going to lose, I don't think anyone expected to get their tails kicked in kind of the way it went. So, the temperature is pretty hot around Lexington, not outside. It's perfect out. It'll be perfect for the game Saturday night. But around the program, there's a lot of things going on, a lot of criticism, and it's tense right now. But it also is, there's 10 games left, and it's the most fun time of year at the same time. So hopefully they could salvage this season. We'll get into some of the things that kind of went wrong and this matchup here. But, it's a quick start and a busy start here in Lex for sure.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Well, let's go back and look to week 2 because it's been everything. It's been the topic of conversation around Kentucky football. A 31-6 loss to South Carolina at home, as we were talking about before we started recording, Aaron. A South Carolina team that barely beat Old Dominion, and I think Kentucky was feeling pretty good. What went wrong? How did what happened that allowed that game to play out like it did?
Yeah, the issues, it starts with the offensive side of the ball for sure. I think it was 15 pressures on 21 dropbacks. They just could not hold up in pass protection. And you definitely got to credit South Carolina's 2 edge guys, Kyle Kennard and Dylan Stewart, the freshman. They were as advertised. They played out in their minds, but Kentucky also they could not hold up. All 5 guys on the offensive line, specifically, the left tackle Marcus Cox, left guard Jagger Burton, who went down in the second quarter, but they just could not hold up against that South Carolina front. And Kentucky was able to run the ball actually pretty well. I don't know exactly what the yards per carry was off the top of my head. I think without the sack yardage, it was about either 5.2 or 6.2. I can't remember off the top of my head what it was. So they actually had some success running the ball, but they wanted to throw it so badly. I don't know if it's just because they're trying to get into a rhythm early in the season still, if they're, trying to appease their playmakers. I don't know exactly what it is, but it felt like they sort of got away from what was working. And then in the second half, they had a chance to take the lead. Actually, they were down 10-6. They forced two straight strip sacks on safety and corner blitzes. Maxwell Harrison, the first one, South Carolina recovers, and then Zion Childress, the very next play, same thing, strip sack. And Kentucky, Deion Walker falls on it, can't grab it. Tyrese Fairbury, edge rusher, has his hands around it. Would have been a walk-in touchdown. Can't corral it. South Carolina recovers. That was a missed opportunity. And then, after South Carolina got the ball back the next time on the field, still 10-6, they're lining up for a hard count, 4th and 1, and Kentucky jumps. And then 3 plays later, I think it was a 3rd and 14 or 3rd and 9. There was a 3rd and 14 and 3rd and 9 that South Carolina converted in that game. They give that up, and then the next play after that's a touchdown. And, with the way the offense was operating, it kind of felt like the game was over from there. So, look, the defense had a couple breakdowns here and there, but it starts with the inability to pass protect, the inability to have any semblance of a pass game due to the protection. We'll get into former Bulldog Brock Vandegrift in a minute, but I don't think it was really much he could have done, to be honest with you. Sure, he messed up a read on an RPO. He probably got a little skittish back there. I think any quarterback probably would. So it was just an ugly, ugly day at the office. Pretty much anything that could go wrong did go wrong.
You talk about some of those plays. It's so funny when you look at a game, and I think you see it more when you go back and rewatch, where it's 2 or 3 breaks one way or another that turn into like a 25-point loss. And that one of the fumble you talked about, I saw a screenshot after the fact of the guys like grabbing it, and someone says this was a South Carolina recovery. It's just those little things that if you're in the SEC, it can make all the difference.
Absolutely. Even in a game like that where the score, 25 points, I don't think it was exact reflection of how much better South Carolina is than Kentucky or exactly how that game went down. But breaks like that, that's what happens in the SEC. The error the margin of error is so razor thin. And yeah, that play was just, I don't know how they didn't recover it. And then there was no one within 5 yards of them. So still, like, I don't know. It's still mind boggling to me how you have 2 straight strip sacks, have one where you have 2 guys around the ball and can't corral it. But, that ended up being if they score there on a strip sack there, it's 13-10, and you figure you have South Carolina's offense is kind of in the same boat where they're on the ropes and they don't have much confidence because they couldn't really run the ball in Kentucky. They only averaged about 2.8 yards per carry, even with the sack yards taken out. So it was just one of those weird games. And at the end of the day, though, it really just goes back to that pass protection and an inability to make anything happen through the air. That really, you can't win a game like that in the SEC. I know Kentucky figured it out in 2019 when they threw Lynn Bowden at quarterback, but he ain't walking through those doors, and they don't have 3 stud running backs on the roster either to make that happen.
Aaron, I want to ask you sort of a bigger picture question with this program. You look at Mark Stoops; he's been at Kentucky forever. I think now that Saban is retired, he's the longest tenured SEC coach. But you have kind of a disappointing 2023. You have the rumors about him leaving for A&M. No, he's staying at Kentucky, and then you have this. I mean, what's the temperature around Mark Stoops, and specifically just the fan reaction to how things have played out, and really, I guess, the last year?
Yeah, I think he bought himself a lot of credibility and a lot of patience, for what he was able to do here from 2016 through 21, where you have the 2 10-win seasons. You start the bull streak that they're on now. They've taken care of Louisville every year. They're still taking care of Florida. So, he's built up a lot of positive and a lot of momentum and a lot of things that, the fan base grew to love him for. But when you have 2 straight years where you fall under where you were expected to be. You start this year with the clunker against a team that, one, none of the fans like. The fan bases don't like each other. The players don't like each other. It's a true rivalry at this point with not even, obviously the stuff with Shane Beamer and Stoops in 22, but it even stems back just from all the close games they've had really since Kentucky got it going under Stoops. And, you lay an egg like that at home, and it looks like you're on pace, just with how daunting the schedule is to possibly disappoint again, maybe miss a bowl for the first time since 2015. And yeah, the temperature is hot. The fan base has not been this mad at Mark Stoops since I've been here in 2017 for sure. And, the thing with it is he's built up enough good graces and he has a salary where I don't think they'd fire him, but it would come down to 2 things. 1, another job, which we saw was almost the case with Texas A&M, or 2, he's 56. His father died young of a heart attack. His brother, we all know, Bob Stoops, retired early, but in large part because of that. I mean, I've heard for years that he's not a guy who's going to go coach into his late 60s or 70s like Nick Saban did, or Kirk Ferentz, at his alma mater at Iowa. He's not a guy who's going to ride it out too long. He has other business ventures, even in Lexington. He has a bourbon company. He's involved in the horse industry. Like, this is not a guy that's going to coach forever. So maybe he learns, he gets something out of the John Calipari playbook, or something that should have happened with Cal, which was, hey, look, I had a great run here. It's kind of run its course. Let's pack it up. He probably outstayed his welcome here. And, Kentucky only was able to get him off their hands because Arkansas took him. So maybe Mark Stoops looks and learns from that, so he keeps the reputation, because I truly think even if they have a bad year this year, if he walks away, he could come back and get celebrated here next year. Whereas if he comes back next year, they struggle again, and we keep on this continuous cycle, then it's going to turn into a Calipari situation where maybe it's going to take 5 or 10 years for the fan base to forgive you again. So I honestly think he's probably watched that and learned how that has unfolded. But, at the same time, there is still 10 games left in this season. And I think, this game is going to be a real challenge. I don't think anyone's going to pick them to win this game. They play Ohio next week, should be 2-2, and then they go to Ole Miss. That's probably 2-3. But after you get through those 5 games, the next 3 games become, they're all winnable. It's Vanderbilt, Florida, Auburn, all teams that, and Vandy at Auburn, and Auburn being at home. Like, those are games that you can win. And if you win all 3 of those, it changes the trajectory of the season and probably some of this talk. But it's going to be really interesting to see how things unfold. But definitely right now, there's a lot of unrest, more than I've been, accustomed to for sure on the football side of things since I've been here.
And definitely help hope just for Mark Soup's sake that however much longer his tenure goes, that fans don't lose sight of the job he's done. I mean,
Absolutely.
Kentucky, in the early 2000s, I mean, Kentucky and Vanderbilt, I guess you could throw Mississippi State in there. Some years were among the worst programs in football. I mean,
No
Mark's
doubt.
done a great job, but it's a lot of what you see at many different situations where it's very easy to outstay your welcome, and
Yes.
fans lose sight of everything you've done. So I definitely hope
Right.
I definitely hope that people keep in mind what Mark has accomplished. Well, you mentioned him a few minutes ago, and obviously Georgia fans want to hear about Brock Vandegrift, a guy that was at Georgia for several years,
Yep.
a guy that competed for the starting job before the 2023 season. Carson Beck beats him out. And then Brock enters the portal after the 2023 season, goes to Kentucky, coming off a really rough showing. As you
Yeah.
mentioned, wasn't all on Brock, but 3 of 10 passing, 30 yards, 0 touchdowns, 1 interception, had negative 29 rushing yards when you include
The sacks. Yep.
the sack numbers. So just tell me what you've seen from Brock through 2 games. What do you like about his game? What are areas you think he needs to improve, especially going into this one?
Yeah, he played great week 1 against Southern Miss to start positive. I mean, first drive he did have a tip pick, but after that, I mean, he had one ball that could have gotten picked, but other than that, I mean, he was pretty flawless. Honestly, he operated at a really high level. I mean, he was lowering his shoulder into guys, which is something I know that I think it was Malachi Stark said at SEC Media Days that he's not a slider, and he kind of proved that in that Southern Miss game. Threw the ball with great accuracy, a couple of shots downfield, hit Jamori Macklin for a 46-yard game, and really like a lot to be excited about, a lot to like from his debut. And then that game against South Carolina, I mean, look, again, it starts with the offensive line, 15 pressures, 4 sacks when Vandegrift was in, 12 hurries. Like, it'll be hard for Patrick Mahomes to operate with that. I mean, it just is what it is. But there was a play, early in the game. I think the game was still scoreless, 2nd and 1, RPO, where clearly the middle is wide open if you hand it off to the running back or take it yourself. And he opts to, go with a jet sweep pass, and it goes for -7. So things like that, a couple of pockets that were clean that he kind of ran into pressure and throwing it away. I think that probably goes into not trusting what you're seeing out there when there's guys in your face all game. So look, I mean, it was his 2nd career start, 1st in the SEC. Did not go. It went way worse than anyone could have expected. He took a lot of accountability, but it does come down to playing better around him. I think he has shown when he's had time, even in that South Carolina game, he had a 32-yard pass, down the sideline to Dane Keith that was perfectly placed, perfectly executed, and was Kentucky's really only was their only explosive pass game of the whole game. He had 32 passing yards on that completion, but ended up with 30 because of other plays going backwards. So, look, he's definitely, the jury's still out, but I still think there's goodwill there that he built up in that first game, where if you can protect him a little bit better, you could see the upside there. You can see why he was, a number 5. I think the number 5 quarterback in the 21 class, why, Georgia held him in such high regard, why he was even battling a guy like Carson Beck, who's going to be a 1st-round pick next year in the first place. But, there's still a lot of meat on the bone there. But first-time starter, got 10 games left, a lot of time to make that game against South Carolina an anomaly.
You look at that offensive line, like you mentioned, that was a big part of the issue. Are you surprised they've struggled? I mean, bringing back Eric Wolford as the offensive line coach, is this a surprise that they've had such issues on the offensive line?
So I think the biggest thing that's shocking about it is they're run blocking really well, and they can't hold up in pass pro, which is, I guess when you look at Eric Wolford's track record, that was an issue at Alabama last year. I know they had a young, inexperienced line there, but I think they led the SEC in sacks allowed, and they were one of the best rushing offenses in the SEC. So, part of that's they had Jalen Milroe at quarterback running, but still, they held up very well in the run game. This offense, it's interesting because they have a lot of experience, but it's guys who, they're good players. They're not great. They don't have what they had in 2021, where they had Luke Fortner, who's was an NFL starter for a few years with the Jags. I think he's on the bench this year, but besides the point, Darian Kennard, NFL draft pick at right tackle, Dare Rosenthal, NFL free agent signing at left tackle. I mean, they just had dudes on that Eli Cox, who was, when he was playing at guard, he's now their center at Kentucky, currently was a midseason All-American that year. They just had dudes on that offensive line. And Wolford inherited that room in 21. He didn't – that was either John Schlarman's recruits, the late offensive line coach who really built Kentucky's offensive line into what it was when they were playing at an elite level from 2017 to 21, or – I think the only guy that Wolford handpicked from that room was Dare Rosenthal, who was a transfer from LSU. So, the one thing he failed to do in his 1 year here was build much depth behind them. And that was something that was an issue at Alabama last year. And that's still something Kentucky's recovering from, given all the turnover they've had in the offensive coaching staff. So you look at their starting five, they have, two grad seniors in Eli Cox and Marcus Cox at center and left tackle. Eli was probably their best offensive lineman last week, but Marcus Cox who's a seventh-year senior, probably had the worst game of his college career between here and Northern Illinois. At right tackle, Gerald Mincey's the guy who's been in the SEC for a while. He got banged up, came back in the second half, but, he didn't have a great game. Did really well in run blocking. Again, couldn't pass protect. And then, at the guard spots, Jalen Farmer's a first-time starter, transfer from Florida. And then they lost their left guard, Jagger Burton, who he's really struggled throughout his whole tenure here, but he won't play probably Saturday. He's doubtful. Dylan Ray is a guy they move around. He's probably going to play in that spot. So I think it comes down to this. Like, am I surprised that it was that bad? Yes. But the lack of continuity with the offensive staff and scheme, and it's going to lead to a lot of kinks to work out, especially early in a season. And when you face a team like South Carolina, where the strength of their club is two elite edge rushers, the more in hindsight, the more it made sense that performance kind of happened the way it did.
One of the bright spots from that South Carolina game for Kentucky was the run game. They actually did move the ball pretty well. Sure. Who are the backs to know, and how would you sort of describe their running style?
Yeah, so Demi Sumo-Karmbe is the feature back. Chip Trainum is a guy they brought in from Ohio State, but he broke his hand in fall camp. He's still out. So Demi Sumo-Karmbe, who was on the team last year, and they kind of used him more as a slot receiver because he can do a lot in the pass game, and they were set at running back with the way Ray Davis played. So he's the guy who's going to carry the bulk of the load. He's been fantastic so far this season. He's not a guy who's going to go and get those gritty yards up the middle, but if he's able to get to the edge, he's got elite speed, and he's even been able to break some runs where they've opened some holes up the middle, but it's not a guy who, like on 3rd and 1, necessarily want with the ball in his hands. And then the guy who's been behind him is Jason Patterson, a true freshman who's also done really well, and he's more that physical runner. He must have got hurt in the South Carolina game because that availability report came out last night, and he's doubtful. So that takes, your two top of your 3 top running backs on the roster, 2 are out this weekend. Most likely Patterson doubtful, Trainum definitely out. And then so Jamarian Wilcox, the redshirt freshman, who's a 5'9" burner who didn't play much last year, battling injury. He's probably going to see more time, I think, in this game just because of need. And then, outside of that, the only other scholarship running back they have, Tavani Menzel, is a true freshman who had an ACL as a high school senior last year. I'm going to ask today. I'm actually going to something on my radar to ask Mark Stoops if he's even an option. And so that would be your only 2 running backs. And then the caveat, though, is they have Gavin Wimstadt, who was a 2-year starting quarterback at Rutgers, who last year ran for over 500 or close to, if not over 500 yards. They used him a lot last week in Wildcat formations, and he broke off some big runs, had a 24-yard run, had a 21-yard run that was called back for a hold. So he's a 6'3", 229, and can really move. So he'll factor into the run game for sure, but it's getting thin at running back with Patterson doubtful. That was a pretty surprising. They kept that really under the radar until the report came out Wednesday, and that's a tough blow with the state of the running back room just from a health perspective. But like you said, they have run the ball well, and the offensive line has done a great job run blocking if they've done anything well. So we'll see how that translates with Patterson out on Saturday.
When I look at Kentucky, Aaron, I look at Barron Brown, I swear it feels like he's been at Kentucky forever. What have you seen from him to this point in the year? And who are the other pass catchers that Georgia fans need to keep an eye on Saturday?
Yeah, Brown had his first game without a catch in his college career last week, so it'll be interesting to see. He's a guy that has all the talent in the world. I mean, elite speed, guy who has gotten better. He had a little bit of a drop ratio early in the season last year, really improved on making those tough catches toward the end of last year. Had a really good game week 1, and he scored 2 touchdowns in that game. And a guy they're going to get involved as much as possible. But really the thing for him has been more so the mental side of things, mental toughness, finishing plays. And, we'll see how he kind of responds after not being a huge factor last week. Dane Key, the other, junior duo that part of that duo of junior receivers between Brown and Key is more of your 6'3" X receiver. He's last week caught that 32-yard pass. He had 60 yards, I believe, receiving on 3 or 4 grabs in week 1. Just a reliable guy that's been here a while, been there, done that. And he's another guy that's, really grown from a maturity standpoint. And he's also grown physically. He put on about 15 pounds this offseason. It looks more the part. And then Jamori Macklin is the slot receiver. They brought him in from North Texas, finished second in the country last year, and yards per catch, an explosive play guy, a lot of speed. Line him up in the slot. He could play outside. So that's another guy they're going to want to get involved. And then the other two would be Fred Ferrier, transfer from UAB, who had a really strong camp. I think he actually had a pretty good game against Georgia last year at UAB, if I'm not mistaken. I think I was comparatively had a good game. not 100 yards receiving or anything like that. But I think he had a couple grabs for about 40 yards or something like that. So he's a guy they like in that room. And then Anthony Brown-Stevens, the sophomore. So, the receiver room is actually one of their deepest on the entire roster. It's just a matter of and the tight ends with Jordan Dingle and Josh Caddis. I mean, it's just a matter of trying to get them the ball. I mean, have time to throw it, get those guys in space and see what you can do. But, that'll be a tough task this weekend.
Take a quick break, come back, talk about the defense a little bit, and then turn our attention to Saturday and how we see things playing out. Well, Aaron, if we're going to talk about Georgia, Kentucky, we got to make sure and talk about another former Dawg, Jamon Dumas-Johnson, a former All-American at Georgia, obviously did really well as a Bulldog, transfers to Kentucky. What have you seen from him to this point, and how do you feel like he fits on this Kentucky defense?
Yeah, he's played really well so far. He's definitely been a bright spot for this team. I mean, week 1, second play as a cat, he has a pick tipped up in the air, and he pulled it down, and that turned into a touchdown drive and get a quarterback hit later in that game. Last week, 4 total tackles, nothing crazy, but he was always reading his keys. He was in the right spot at the right time. He was just did his job. Nothing special, but did his job last week. So, he's been a good addition. They lost Trevin Wallace, who was their starting inside linebacker all of last season, most of 22 with the injuries they had there to some veterans, and guy who had a ton of speed and got drafted in the 3rd round by the Panthers. So able to kind of slide a former All-American, part of that winning culture at Georgia has been huge for them. That he was talking yesterday, like that was his first loss as a starter since he was a sophomore in high school against South Carolina. So a guy that brings a lot of a winning attitude to him. It's been a really good addition for him. And, he's a leader on that defense for sure.
That's a good point, because I forgot he got hurt in the Missouri game, so he was not around for the Alabama loss. I want to make sure and plug a story you wrote, Aaron, about Brock Vandagriff and Jamon Dumas-Johnson. Obviously, a lot of eyes on them going into this game. What did you think of what they had to say about playing their former team and sort of their mindset going into this one?
Yeah, they kept it pretty even keeled. Honestly, they didn't get too caught up in it. Vandagriff did, when he was asked about, I think it was Chaz Chambliss, the linebacker, had some comments about them always competing, and that opened Brock up a little bit to talk about his friendship with him, Cash Jones, Carson, and Brock Bowers. So, he opened up a little bit. They were trying to treat it like every other game. As you've probably known with Dumas Johnson, he does not say much. He is a business-like guy. So he was asked about it. He's like, no emotions at all. They're my guys still. We hang out. No emotions. So he was he didn't have much to say at all, to be honest with you. But Vandagriff did open up a little bit, and he talked about over the offseason, or when we talked to him, I forget if it was the spring or if it was this fall camp, that him and Brock are him and Carson are very close. They talk almost every day. I talked to Carson about it at SEC Media Days. Those two are very close friends, that we'll be rooting for each other, not too much so, this weekend, but they are, very, very close friends. They root for each other hard every weekend. So I think the most important thing to take away is there's some transfer portal departures lead to bad blood like there was last year here when Kentucky and Vandy with Ray Davis. I mean, they were there was a lot of hits late on Ray Davis, John back at them. That clearly was a marriage that ended poorly. I don't think the marriage between, Dumas Johnson and Georgia or Vanda Griffin, Georgia ended poorly at all from the comments they had. And then obviously the comments I've been reading from you guys down in Athens. So, I'm sure they're excited. I'm sure after the game, the emotions will pour out a little bit more than they were showing pregame, but business-like approach for now, for sure.
Definitely excited to see after the game. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of photo ops with their former teammates. That'll be very cool to see. Well, we talked about earlier, guys who feel like have been at Kentucky for a while, and Deion Walker's one of them, and he's been really effective. I'd say Kentucky fans are happy that he's still around there. What have you seen from him on the line, and along with Deion Walker, who are the other names on the rest of this defense that we should keep an eye on?
Yeah, Deion, look, he hasn't showed up in the stats sheet quite yet, but he's wreaked havoc. I mean, the Dumas Johnson interception I was talking about a minute ago, Walker blew that play up, was in Tate Rodemaker's face, forced a bad throw. Last week just made plays in the run game, and really teams are just afraid to run up the middle against Kentucky because of him. And he's a guy who's a projected top 10 to 15 draft pick, 6'6", 345 for NFL fans. Dexter Lawrence is the guy I point to, where so much size and speed. Shouldn't be able to move that fast at that speed, at that size. So, he's obviously the star of this defense, and, is hoping to get a little more numbers in the stat sheet, but that nose tackle, defensive tackle position, often it's what they do with the dirty work that matters most. And then the defensive front's been great. I mean, they've stopped the run. I think they're number 8 in the country in run defense. They only allowed 5 yards rushing against Southern Miss, and they did a really good job with Rocket Sanders and Lenore Sellers last week against South Carolina. Trayvon Ripke on the edge is a guy that's popped early this year. He had a sack week 1. He had a chance for another one last week, just couldn't quite finish. But he's been a guy who's been really active so far. Alex Afari, a guy who they move around all over the place, whether it's in the nickel, at safety, at inside backer. He's had 2 tackles for loss in both games so far this season. He's been outstanding. So he's definitely named to watch. Number 3, Octavius Oxendine's a guy who's been around forever on that defensive line. He was the one that was guilty of that 4th and 1 offsides, but, he's been effective in the run game. And then, in the secondary, Maxwell Harrison, I still think, is one of the more underrated corners in all college football. I mean, that's a guy who was voted first team all SEC down in Dallas, had 5 picks last year, 2 went for touchdowns, both in the same game against Vanderbilt. Just a guy that you feel good about taking care of his side of the field, and he's done a good job so far this season. He is on that availability report, but he's probable, so they should be good there. On the other side of the field, honestly, that was a big concern going into the year, was that cornerback 2 spot. But I think between JQ Hardaway, 6'3", guy who transferred in from Cincinnati last year, and then Jansen Dunn, a guy who transferred in last year from Ohio State, I think they've actually held their own pretty well. DJ Waller's mixed in there too. He's a transfer from Michigan that actually was running with the ones at spring camp, but decided to transfer with the coaching changes. And so they're in pretty good shape at corner. Safety, they have depth. They just haven't. Zion Childress has played well. He had a strip sack last week. He's been really good in the run game. He's made some plays in coverage as well. But, Jordan Levitt struggled early this season. Ty Bryant is a true sophomore who, played a bit last year, but, he had a pick kind of in that center field position last week, but otherwise he's struggled. So they need to get more out of that safety room. Christian Story hasn't factored in too much yet. I do wonder if maybe they try to get him more involved with Levitt struggling. So defensive line wise, front 7 wise, between Dumas Johnson and Derek Jackson, the inside backer. I mean, that's the strength of this football team, but to be a complete defense, I think it really just comes down to the guys in the back end and that safety room playing better, because all the breakdowns, when you go look at the tape, it's really been the safeties not either running, covering the wrong guys, miscommunication, whatever it may be. That's kind of where the issues have stemmed from so far.
Well, Aaron, when we look at this matchup specifically, I'll start here. I always, on these preview episodes, I always feel bad for my guests because usually it's just me setting y'all up and making y'all talk the whole time. So I'll kind of turn the tables here and ask you, do you have questions, for me on this Georgia team? Is there something that, you don't know about this Georgia team or that you're curious about this Georgia team going into this game?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think offensively, we kind of know what they are, right? The offensive line feels like it's pretty much intact. I know they lost Mims, but a lot of familiar names, between Ratledge and Wilson, guys that have been around on that offensive line. I guess Wilson's the first-year starter, right? Van Pran was
Yes.
Okay. So, but a lot of familiar names there. Carson Beck, we all know, in my opinion, should be the number one pick in next year's draft. As a Giants fan, I wouldn't mind if he's slinging it for my team next season. So, but I guess my stuff is more on the defensive side of the ball. Michael Williams, I know, projected top 10 pick like Deion Walker. He's a guy that looks like he's going to be out this game. Just it seems like Georgia's defensive line is built they're better. Don't get me wrong, but they're built similarly to Kentucky's in the standpoint where they're not necessarily the big bendy guys. It's more the girth and the big run stuffing guys that, they'll get to the quarterbacks with simulated pressures and whatnot, but they're not going to be like South Carolina where it's just a chaos attack pass rush, so to speak. Am I reading that right?
I think so. And I think it's something that even going back to last year, Georgia's sort of been knocked, I think, especially by fans. They don't record a bunch of sacks. They get pressures, they get quarterback hurries. But you look at the situation right now going into this game, Aaron, you mentioned it. I don't think Michael Williams is going to play on Saturday. That's a significant blow. I mean, he's one of your best players on either side of the ball. But trying to get Jordan Hall back sounds like he's making progress. Or trying to get Warren Brinson back, it sounds like he's making progress. Xavier McLeod, a guy they got from South Carolina. Don't know if he'll be able to play Saturday, but they're trying to work him back. So they've got options, but they are kind of shorthanded with some of the guys. I mean, they're leaning a lot on Nazir Stackhouse, the nose tackle, Christian Miller, a guy that has shown progress. But, those guys on the whole, to me, are much better against the run. You need to see those guys really take off and trying to get after the passer. I think Christian Miller specifically, I'd like to see more of him. But to that point, they've gotten good play from Damon Wilson at outside linebacker. He's done a really good job. They're trying to get guys like Jalen Walker, who usually plays inside linebacker. They'll put him out at edge some. This defensive line, I think it's played pretty well, especially given the circumstances. But I know fans want to see them record more sacks. I don't know if that's coming, but if they can get healthy, that'll definitely
do it.
You're right. This will be a good test of that. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. So, and then I think with that, just how good is Malachi Starks? Every time I watch that guy, I'm more blown away. I know he's a guy that Kentucky keeps talking about big time this weekend. So what have you seen from him? And also, their corners, how have they held up so far? I think I'd have to refresh my memory, but I feel like some of them are younger guys, at least with some of the losses they've had to the pros.
Definitely. Well, starting with Malachi, I mean, I've told this to folks previewing the 2025 NFL draft. If you told me one Georgia guy that's going to go next year is like a lock, can't miss, I would pick Malachi. And that's no slight to some of those other guys, Carson, Michael, some of the other guys, but Malachi's just different, and he's just a natural player. We saw it his very first game of college where he makes that acrobatic interception to Bo Nix.
Yep.
It's like, this guy's here, and you're going to have to deal with him for the next 3 years. But he's played really well. I like what he's done. And he had a big interception, another acrobatic interception in week one. So he's got a knack for making plays in Atlanta for sure. Those younger guys, I actually wrote about this on Thursday. So thank you, Aaron. I'm going to plug
There you go. Go for
it. I wrote on the cornerbacks. I've got Dalen Everett back. He's back for his second year as a starter. I think he's done well. He was on the wrong end of just a few really nice plays against Clemson. I mean, a throw. Cade Klubnik's best throw of the day was just right out of reach of Dalen. I really don't think there's anything he could have done. He's looked like he's made progress. They've kind of had a rotation at the other spot. It's mainly been Julian Humphrey, who started these 2 games so far. He's played well. Daniel Harris, another young guy, he hasn't started, but they have routinely been switching in and out. I think you'll continue to see that, and this will be a good test of that if they continue to rotate guys in. But I think at this point they feel really good about the secondary as a whole, and they got Jonell Aguero back last week. He is the starting star. He didn't play against Clemson due to injury. he looked good, albeit it was Tennessee Tech. So he'll be tested, and so will those corners. But I think they feel pretty good about the secondary.
There you go. Yeah, I think that's what it's going to come down to for Kentucky is finding a way to put some points on the board. If they want to hang around, they got to put a few on the board because usually, when Georgia comes up here to Lex, the defense usually plays really well. I think the last 2 games Georgia's come up here, Kentucky's held them to 16 or less. So it's going to come down to Kentucky if they want to hang around. And I'm not saying I think this is the most talented Georgia offense that's come up here. Obviously Brock Bowers isn't on that offense, but with the quarterback play with Carson Beck, ETN, adding him into that mix, the wide receiver room, 5 guys scored touchdowns in that receiver room last week. I mean, again, Tennessee Tech, but it just shows you how much depth you have. That's not easy to do. And I think 6 different receivers because Humphrey scored week 1. So it's going to be a real challenge, but Kentucky's strength is their defense, and they feel like they can hang around if the offense at least gives them something.
So let's make sure, too, and run through injuries of note for Kentucky. And I'll start with Georgia. For folks who haven't kept up with it, the SEC is now requiring availability reports. The first one went up Wednesday night. Yes, a long time coming. Looking at Georgia, Roderick Robinson, running back, is out. This is not a surprise. He's been banged up. I think it's going to be a while before he comes back. We already mentioned this. Michael Williams is listed as doubtful. I would be surprised if he plays because he's still dealing with an ankle injury from the Clemson game. Defensive lineman Jordan Hall, Xavier McLeod, Warren Brinson, all questionable. I think that Jordan Hall and Warren Brinson are in the best position to potentially play. But again, I don't feel confident in either one of those as they continue to get back. You mentioned Jason Patterson earlier. Who are the other notable injuries to watch on the Kentucky side?
Yeah, Jason Patterson is a brutal blow just because of the numbers they have at running back, to be honest with you. I mean, this would be a huge test for him as a true freshman going up against this Georgia front. But just because of the numbers at running back, I'll ask today if the other true freshman, Tavani Menzel, is even an option. But they might just be too deep, and then a backup quarterback running the ball and Vandegrift, obviously, too, is a threat with his legs. But that's a blow if he's out. Jagger Burton is the other doubtful. He's a left guard, highly recruited guy a couple of years ago. It hasn't quite, he's a 3-year. This is his 3rd year starting, and it just hasn't fully clicked. He's had flashes. He had his good games, but he struggled mightily against South Carolina last week, and then unfortunately on a field goal got hurt. So he left that game. I don't expect him to play. Mark Stoops said it. Actually, he doesn't usually offer injury reports or anything updates after games, and he said it would be hard for him to play next week, last Saturday. So I'm going to operate and assume Dylan Ray, who's a versatile guy inside, is going to fill in at left guard for Jagger Burton this weekend. And then all the guys who are out are long-term injury guys. There's nothing on that that's surprising there. Chip Trainum's the one that stings that he hasn't. They thought maybe they can get him back by now at this point in the year. I saw him yesterday at practice. He's still in a cast, so feels like he's at least a couple weeks away still. Josiah Hayes was going to be their starting nose tackle. He tore his Achilles, I believe, in spring camp. It might have been his ACL. I can't remember off the top of my head, but he's not going to be able to go, probably going to miss this whole season. And again, the rest of those injuries are either Darren Henry Young was a guy that played really well for them last year, but he tore his ACL at Mississippi State last season, hasn't quite recovered as quickly as they hope. So he's still out. So all those guys who are listed out have been out all year. Nothing surprising there, but Jason Patterson is Jagger Burton hurts because you want continuity in your starting 5, but really Patterson is the brutal blow. And then all the guys they have no one listed questionable. The guys who are listed probable, Maxwell Harrison, he should be good to go. Same with, I believe Gerald Mincy, the starting right tackle, is on there as probable. He'll be good to go as well. So all the probables feel good about. No questionables yet. If they do have a questionable, the only questionable they had last week was DJ Waller, and he ended up playing. So just to see the odds of if they have a guy questionable and if they'll play. But nothing too new on this injury report this week outside of Patterson.
All right, Aaron. So looking at this game, what has to happen for Kentucky to be in position to hang around and try to make this thing interesting at home?
Yeah, they got to play defense the way they're capable of. I mean, they have a really talented unit. It's the strength of their team, and if they can get some better play from the safeties, I mean, I think they can where they've always played Georgia stout defensively here for whatever reason, outside of 2018 when Swift and Holyfield were running all over the place. But they've usually been able to hold their own against Georgia defensively here. If they do that, that already gives you one puncher's chance, and then they got to find a way to get points on the board somehow, some way. Obviously, this Georgia defense can make the arguments the best in the country. I don't think anyone's oblivious to that around here, but you can't go 2 weeks in a row without scoring a touchdown and expect to have a chance. They got to figure out a way to get some sort of offense going and generate some positive momentum to kind of just build that confidence back. I think their confidence just got zapped last week, and that's why it got so out of hand late. They just knew they could not operate as an offense. That negative energy bled into the defensive play later in the game, and it just ended up being an all systems failure. So I think if the defense continues to do what they've done, for 6 of the 8 quarters, they haven't played 8 quarters yet this year because they had a rain shortened game, the first one. But if they play like they had the majority of the season defensively, that'll give them a puncher's chance. They just need the offense to contribute some way, somehow. And they got to give the crowd something to get fired up and make it a home field advantage. I think this fan base is defeated, as low on Kentucky football as they've been in quite some time. This house will still be packed. There'll obviously be plenty of red in the crowd, no doubt about it. But this is a game that has been sold out for a while. It's a first Saturday night SEC game of the year. They'll bring it, but you got to keep them engaged and keep them in the seats. Honestly, they were starting to flood out late in the third quarter last week. So if you can hang around, keep the fans engaged, make it a home field advantage. I mean, those are all the keys. All easier said than done, but that's the recipe to success in this one.
So I'm going to put you on the spot, Aaron. How does this thing play out, and what's your final score of this one?
Yeah, I obviously don't see Kentucky winning this game. I don't think they're gonna. I don't think they're gonna quit, though. I think there'll be a much more fight than we saw against South Carolina last year. I even think the game obviously last year down in Athens was lopsided, but I never thought at any point in that game Kentucky quit. At last week, it kind of felt like they quit a little bit. I think there's too much veteran leadership and too much pride on this team to quit. But I just think the talent gap, asking the offensive line to completely turn around their pass blocking in 1 week when this is the opponent is going to be hard to do. I think Georgia will score enough, obviously, to get it done. And I think Kentucky will hold their own defensively, but not enough. I'll go 31-13 Georgia. We'll go with that.
Just to read off our scores over at Dawgs 24/7. Kip has Georgia 35-12. Ben has Georgia 31-9. I am going 34-7. I do think that Kentucky is going to find the end zone, but it's going to be tough to keep up. Well, Aaron, I really appreciate
take that. They need that.
They need the points. They need the points. Aaron, I appreciate you coming on and make sure and allow you to plug anything at Cat's Paws, what you guys got going on, getting ready for the big game on Saturday night.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Catspaws.com. I've been working throughout the week at these practices. Wrote a whole big thing on Tuesday about the offensive line and kind of what went wrong, the pass block, run block, why there's such a disconnect. So that's an in-depth thing. And if you want to read and kind of figure out exactly what's going on with that offensive line, I'll obviously be there Saturday covering this one. And then we'll get an update today from Mark Stoops on what's going on with that running back room. And so you can always find us catspaws.com locally with our bi-weekly magazine, football, basketball yearbooks. And then on Wednesday nights, I'm on the Believe in Kentucky podcast with former UK quarterback Jalen Whitlow, Vinny Hardy, a former UK writer. We do that every Wednesday.
Super awesome. Love following y'all's coverage of Kentucky. Well, we'll wrap up this episode right there. Thanks everyone who watched us live, everyone who is watching or listening to it after the fact. Be sure to go subscribe to Dawgs 24/7. Go subscribe to Cat's Paws if you're a big Kentucky fan. Get ready for a big football season, and we're just getting this thing started. Be sure also to go to Dawgs 24/7 on YouTube, on TikTok. Go subscribe there. We've got all kinds of good video content there. So for Aaron Gershon, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.